Hey watch friends, today we're going to take a look at one from a brand that I'm sure all of you know and many of you love. This is the Seiko Samurai, and specifically the one we're looking at today is dubbed the King Samurai because of some upgrades we'll talk about. Most notably, it has a sapphire crystal instead of their mineral crystal or their hardlex, and it has, instead of an aluminum bezel insert, it actually has a polished ceramic bezel insert, but we'll take a full dive as we go throughout the video. The specific model number on this one is going to be SRPE33, and I'll of course have links to this in the description. Speaking of, while this video is not sponsored, if you'd like to help out the channel at all, I will actually have Amazon affiliate links in the description. You can even pick this one up from Amazon. Prices of course do vary, but we'll talk about more of the specifics as we go throughout. First, let's go ahead and look at some of the basics of this. In case you missed it, a while back we did do an unboxing. Honestly, there's not a whole lot to look at here. If you want to check out that video, feel free to go back. Basically, you get the box, you get a pillow, it comes on the bracelet that we'll look at later on. This strap that we're looking at here is actually an aftermarket sailcloth strap. This one's from a company called Artem. I did actually feature a review of this in the past as well. And then outside of that, you just get the booklet. So it's a pretty basic overall packaging. As for the specifics of the watch, let's get into some of the nuts and bolts. On this one, the case is going to be coming in, so I measured at roughly the 2 o'clock to the 8 o'clock position. And as we'll look at, this does have a step down right around that position, so if we come up just inside of the step down, this one's coming in at 42.6 millimeters. If you actually include that outer perimeter there, that's going to be coming in at 44.4 millimeters, which I believe Seiko listed as a 44 total, so I'm pretty sure that's what they're going from for their measurements. Taking the bezel does step down slightly if you compare it to this inner section, but compared to the outer section, it's about flush there, and that's coming in at 43.7 millimeters. And we'll look at that further as well. As far as the lugs, this one does come with a strap change friendly 22 millimeter lugs, and as we'll see, it does have drilled lugs, so it's even nice and easy to change the straps out. As far as the lug to lug, this one, first I'll note, it does come at 48.6 millimeters, which is really not too bad at all given the overall size of this, especially if you're going from the 44. However, as we'll see, this on the bracelet does have male end links, so taking those male end links into account, that's going to bump you up to 54 millimeters, so a significant difference there from relatively large male end links. As far as the thickness, this one is going to be coming in at 13.25 millimeters, so 13.25 millimeters overall, and that is including this crystal. Speaking of the crystal, this one does have a flat sapphire crystal, and it does have an inner AR coating. Additionally, you might have noticed, at the 3 o'clock position, this does feature a Cyclops, and we'll see that more throughout too. I will say, I'm not generally a fan of Cyclops, but as we'll look at through, this one actually really grew on me. I kind of like it, and I think it adds to the overall appeal of this one. For the movement, this is coming with a Seiko 4R35. Many of you may be familiar, since we feature mostly micro brands, with the NH35 movement. The 4R35 is essentially the Seiko branded NH35, which they make Seiko. They make the NH35 as well. So it's going to have all your standard specs that you would feature there. It's going to have your standard hand winding, hacking, all those kind of things. It is going to be a low beat movement, does have a bidirectional rotor, decent power reserve, etc. As far as the water resistance, this includes 200 meters or 20 atmospheres of water resistance. And many people, especially when you see that Prospex logo or that X there, many people do really put a lot of faith and trust because of the certifications and everything that the Seikos go through for that water resistance. So while it's not as high as some, you can really stake into that for your basic diving needs. The weight. On this Artem strap, so on the sailcloth strap here, this one is coming in at 112.4 grams. Using the unsized bracelet, and this is all 316L stainless steel, but this bracelet's rather hefty, so it does actually bring it up to 204.3 grams, which I was relatively surprised by that heft. It's not a huge watch overall, but that's fairly stout as far as weight. It doesn't feel obnoxious on the wrist, but it's definitely not one that will disappear that you won't notice. It's on the heavier side. So now that we have the basic specs out of the way, let's go ahead and take a better look into some of the specifics and what it's like to live with this watch. First, the immediate thing you're going to notice is that dial. The dial, with this one being part of the Save the Ocean series, this one is clearly an homage to the ocean. So as you look across that dial, you're struck immediately with that rippling effect. It looks like you're out in the open sea. Not only does it have that kind of fume where it gets darker on the outer perimeter, but overall it does really, especially as the light hits it, look just like light reflecting off of the top of open ocean. Additionally, running from about the 4 o'clock, or rather the 8 o'clock to the 4 o'clock position, you'll see manta rays that are gliding under the surface there. They're just nice shadows. I think they're tastefully done. You know, some people have complained about that they're a little too subtle. I think they're just about right. They're not completely in your face to where you're noticing them all the time. Depending on how the watch is sitting, you might not pick them up at all. But additionally though, when you're looking for them, you definitely can tell they're there. And I think that's well done. This does have printed text at both the 12 o'clock and the 6 o'clock position. At the 12 o'clock, you're going to see the Seiko name, and then down at the 6 o'clock, as we already saw, the Prospex logo, automatic, and then the overall dive depth for that as well. At the 3 o'clock position, this does have a date window, and it does have the Cyclops over the date window. As you saw, this is not a color-matched date window for this, and that's true for most of the Seiko watches. I really haven't seen too many that do have, if any, that have color-matched date wheels, though I'm sure they're out there. Other than the perimeter, you can see that this one does have a rehaut, and that rehaut does actually have, so it gives a nice slope to it, and that does have your individual minute and second markers, and then those minute markers are broken down in between, and you can see that does go down into sub-seconds or sub-minute, however you want to refer to that. It does vary depending on which marker it's next to as to how many ticks there are in between there as you go around the perimeter. As for the hardware, one thing that you'll notice with both the hands and the markers is this one does have very bold markers all the way around, which you would expect for a dive watch. Additionally, they are all going to be polished, and they are heavily applied with lume, which we'll talk about more in a moment. As far as the handset, this has what has become, kind of, to me at least, a relatively signature Seiko-looking handset. It does have the somewhat of a sword for your minute hand. It does have kind of a little bit of a spear going on for your hour hand, or an arrow, depending on what you want to call it. I'd call it a spear because it hooks back in. And then same thing with your second hand as well. This does get the really cool rocket ship effect. If you've never seen that, highly encourage you to put a Seiko to noon when you have this riding over the hour hand. It's a really cool look. Additionally, as we talked about, this does have for the markers there, you can see each of these is going to be applied. And as you go around the perimeter here, you can see at the 12 o'clock position, it's going to be somewhat of a pentagon shape. And then down at the 6 and the 9 o'clock, you're going to have a trapezoid. And the rest of them, with the exception of the date window at the 3 o'clock, where you don't have a marker, the rest of them are going to be rectangular. As far as the lume application, the lume is applied in typical Seiko fashion. This does have LumaBright applied, and that's going to be to your hands and your markers. As you can see in the footage, it does glow very brightly, and I neglected to say it does have it at the pip on 12 o'clock on the bezel as well. I found this lume to perform pretty excellently overall. It does endure. It does charge up, of course, naturally with just daylight, and it also does charge up well with a UV light, depending on your preference and what you're looking for there. Shifting over to the bezel, this one, as a diver, does have a 120-click unidirectional bezel, which let's go ahead and check out that bezel action. You can hear it there. It's definitely, in typical Seiko fashion, it is on the soft side. I've got to say, honestly, it's not a bezel that I particularly like manipulating for multiple reasons. The action, I don't think, is very tactile. It's a little bit soft. It's a little bit mushy. It just kind of almost feels like a friction fit all the way around, though you can feel little clicks as you go through, but it's not bad. Most importantly, on this particular one, everything does line up. So you can see the markers, the rehaut, as well as the pip there. So that was really lucky with this one. As we know, unfortunately, Seiko doesn't always get that triple alignment right, but they did in this case, so I'm very pleased for that. One of my favorite things about this bezel is this does have, as you can see there, this is a polished ceramic insert on this, and I think it is absolutely stunning. Love the look of that. Think it's very clean. Think it gives a great look to it, and it was one of the reasons why I had to pick one of these up and check it out. Looking at the markers, you can see this does have individual minute markers all the way around. It does additionally have numerals at the increments of 10, with the exception of the 10-minute one there, where you can see as a diver, it goes from more of like a traditional 15-minute indication there, then it picks up with your 20, 30, etc. as you go around. And as we already saw, this does have the pip at the 12 o'clock, and you can see it does have that center there where it actually is a true pip laid into that trapezoid shape there. I will say the bezel on the perimeter here, it has kind of a knurling pattern to that. To me, it's a little bit on the slippery side. It's a little bit tough to grip. As you saw, because it's a fairly light bezel, it's not too bad to manipulate, but it's definitely not the best action, nor the best grip that I've ever felt. Shifting over to the case, this really has a lot going on for it. First and foremost, you're going to notice that there are many angular cuts all the way around as you go through this. Additionally, though, beyond just having the angular cuts, you can see that it has more going on here in terms of the steps and the way that it's kind of inlaid there. This does actually have an undercut, so you can see that this is kind of sloped as you come down. It's not just a straight cut, especially on that intersection, though the outer does have a little bit of that as well. It's not perfectly vertical. Additionally, this does play around with the finishing, so you can see on the flatter sections on the outer perimeter, it does have vertical brushing, and then in the center, it does have a nice mirror polishing going on for that as well. So nice use of both textures as well as changing the surface there, in addition to the overall angular cuts. On the underside, you can see that continuing with that, it does have chamfers down underneath as well, and that is, as you can see, fully polished there, even on the brushed section as you go through, pardon the fingerprints. On the outer perimeter, as we already talked about, towards the tip of the lugs, it does have drilled lugs here, so that makes for nice, easy strap changes. You can just insert a pin in that and pop your straps off. Shifting over to the crown side, you can see this does have integrated crown guards, and check that out for the angular cuts there. So it continues. It's nice and cohesive overall for the design, and I like the incorporation of the different textures and angles all the way through. As for the crown itself, this has a 6.9 millimeter crown, and as you would expect for a dive watch, this is going to be a screw down crown. The knurling texture on this is very reminiscent of the bezel, so I think that blends nicely between the two. And this is unsigned, though you can see they do play around with the texture on that as well, with radial brushing and then polish transitioning out to that knurling. As for the case back on this is going to be screw-in as well, which you would expect for a dive style watch. As far as the textures on this, it is going to be a mix, just like the rest of the watch, where you have brushing, and pardon that sticker there, I didn't want to take that one off. You can see brushing in the middle, and then you can see polishing in the outside. As far as the text, it's pretty typical of the Prospex here. You can see kind of a wave pattern in the middle. You can see where it says the special edition in there, and that's part of the Save the Ocean series. But overall, it's a pretty typical Seiko case back. Transitioning over now, let's go ahead and look at the bracelet. The bracelet on this is going to be solid end links. They are fitted, of course. As far as the textures, this is going to have brushing all the way through there, and then it does have polishing on the outside. As you might have noticed, this is still in the plastic. The reason for that being, this is not my first Samurai, and I can tell you, I personally, to be honest, am not a fan of this bracelet, and we'll talk about why here in just a couple minutes. As far as the proportions, this is going to be 22 millimeters, and then down at the clasp, it does taper down to roughly 20 millimeters. It is going to be a 3-link style, or an oyster, as you might want to refer to it. Looking at the retention for this, you can see that this is going to be held, as with most Seikos, it's going to be with pins, and I believe it does have inner collars on that as well. As for the clasp, this is going to be your traditional fold over. As you can see, it is signed there, and it does have double pushers to open that up. On the side, you'll see that it does have 4 micro adjust holes, if we can get that to focus there. This is, as mentioned, a fold over, and on the inside, it is going to be a stamped clasp for this. One thing, and this is the primary reason why I'm not a big fan of this bracelet, it does have this diver extension. While many people are perfectly fine with that, and certainly if you need it practically, it's a nice asset there. Unfortunately for me, you can see how that kind of articulates. The way that it sits across my wrist, it gives me a terrible hot spot. Every single time I wear one of these Samurai bracelets with that dive extension, it pinches a hold right there, whether I wear it loose or snug. I've tried playing around with positioning for that. Unfortunately, right here, it gives me a terrible, terrible embedded hot spot in that, so I didn't even bother taking the plastic off this one, put it straight on a strap, though that may not bother you, but it's something to be aware of. And as we already talked about, this does have the male end links on there, so with my smaller 6.5-inch wrist, it makes it wear a little larger than I would like as well. Alright, so now that we have a better feel for the watch, let's go ahead and take a look at some comps. First, I wanted to pull in, this is a Zelos Swordfish, and this is actually the Swordfish 40, so it is a little smaller, but I wanted to give an idea there, not only for the difference of coloration, with this one being a teal versus this blue, but additionally, you can see they are reminiscent of each other, and I'm sure you've seen comparisons by Jody or otherwise made to the Swordfish in the past. Certainly, there's a different case shape to it, and obviously we're comparing different sizes on this one, though this looks just like the 42, just in a smaller size. but you can see there's a lot of difference though to the way those cuts go and everything. So certainly they're reminiscent of each other, but very different cases in my opinion overall. But that gives an idea for the sizing in the colors. Additionally, I want to pull in another one that has angular. This, in case you saw this is the Australis C shade. This one was just successfully funded on Kickstarter. This one I mentioned and actually did a comparison with this same watch in that video. This one also has, you can see kind of the angular, the downturn, the ledge. There's a lot of similarities to this, though certainly neither of them is going to be an homage or clone of the other, which I suppose would be the C shade here. They're both unique designs, but I think they stack up well. This one being a 42 and this one being a 44. One of the reasons I wanted to show these is, as you can see, as far as overall presence, this one I think wears a little smaller as far as it's a little more small wrist friendly, the female end links, those kind of things. But overall, as far as the wrist presence, even for larger wristed folks, I think despite this one technically being smaller, I think this actually has more wrist presence than this, which is why I think the 44 is a little misleading. I often refer to this as a 42, and I think that's more accurately sized despite the fact that it does have arguably 44 millimeter measurements. Okay, so now that we have all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and wrap things up with some of the positives, my personal critiques, in the final summary. First, for the positives. The dial on this is, in my opinion, absolutely gorgeous. Whether you're looking at it in low light, in bright light, the sun shimmering off of it, I think it's a striking dial. Additionally, and most importantly with that, I love the fact that this is really paying tribute and contributing towards ocean conservation, something the environment is near and dear to me, as it should be for all of us. So with that, not only do I love the sea creature effect with the manta rays on there, but just the fact that this is bringing more attention to the ocean and to the need to care for it, I think that's excellent. The bezel. I've already talked about this. That polished insert, this is one of my favorite bezels that I've seen. I like the overall patterning for that. I wouldn't have minded if they threw the 10 on there for the numerals, but overall, I think it's just great looking. Love that polish, love the black ceramic, think it's impeccably done. I wouldn't have minded either if they had put some lume across those numerals, but really no complaints there. Overall, it's great. Speaking of the lume, as we already saw, the lume is very solid on this. There's really nothing to complain about there. I think it's well executed, well applied throughout, so nice job there. The Cyclops. As I already kind of gave a nod to earlier in the video, the Cyclops, for me, I think it looks good. I know Cyclopses tend to be polarizing, and I will say I'm generally not in the camp of Cyclopses, but with this flat crystal and kind of everything that's going on there, I think it adds some visual appeal to it, and it does certainly help with the date visibility or legibility also, so that aspect's nice. And additionally, it kind of mixes things up compared to most of the other things in my personal collection, so I like that. As far as some of the critiques, bezel action we already talked about. I would have liked a more tactile feel, I'd like better grip. Across the board, I think the bezel could be better, though it's not a huge downside. The hand length, I've talked about this in the past. You can see the minute hand as well as the second hand, they just stop a lot shy of that outer rehaut. I'd like to see those kicked out further. I think they could have easily done so. I have no complaints about the hour hand, especially with it kissing that Cyclops like it does. But overall, I do think they could have increased the length on the minute and second and should have done so. The bracelet, we already talked about the male end links. I would have loved to have seen that go over to a female end links. And additionally, I would like to see them lose the dive extension on the bracelet. That would wear a lot better for me personally, and I think for most others with smaller wrist and even larger wristed folks as well. So finally, that leads me to the size. The sizing for this, as we've seen throughout, I think certainly it's acceptable on my 6.5 inch wrist. I think I can pull it off overall. It is definitely on the larger side. I think if you have any smaller than my wrist, certainly I think you will find this to wear a little bit large. And I think many others, between the thickness and especially with those male end links on there at that 54 millimeters, I think many people will find this to wear a little larger than they prefer, though certainly there are going to be plenty of people who will find this to wear on the smaller side, depending on your individual preferences, but it's just something to be aware of. So where does that leave us overall? In conclusion, if you love the ocean, if you love Seiko, if you check yes to either one of those, I really don't think you can go wrong with this. Personally, I feel that the Save the Ocean series is the best in Seiko's general dive watch lineup, so I absolutely love it. This one is not a disappointment in any respect. I love the fact that they've gone over to the King Samurai with adding the polished insert, the ceramic insert rather, as well as the Sapphire Crystal. That's something I've been clamoring for on a Samurai for quite some time. Finally, for the price for this, I didn't mention it because it's available at a number of retail sources. The MSRP on this, according to Seiko, is $625. However, you can find it for much less, including that Amazon affiliate link that I mentioned in the description. So I hope this video has been helpful for you. If you did enjoy this, and you could please hit that like button. Additionally, if you haven't done so already, I'll have new content coming all the time. Tremendously appreciated and helps me out if you hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching.